brace yourself, because what has unfolded in the United Kingdom over the past 48 hours is not just a political crisis. It is an institutional earthquake, tearing apart the country's foundations in broad daylight. And if you think you've seen chaos before, wait until you hear what I'm about to reveal. At the very moment Keir Starmer was trying to pose as the modern leader, Prince William did something no heir to the throne has dared to do in 3 centuries. He stood up, faced the Prime Minister as if seeing a real threat to England, and walked out of the auditorium without uttering a single word, turning silence into a statement more powerful than any speech. It was as if the entire weight of the monarchy had fallen upon Starmer live, in front of thousands and a whole country exhausted by Labour's empty promises. And it wasn't just an exit. It was a warning, a clear, cold, direct message. The monarchy will not stand idly by while Starmer tries to rewrite the Constitution with his own hands. The shock was so devastating that for a few seconds, no one in the auditorium even breathed, because everyone there knew, including Starmer himself, that this gesture marked the beginning of something much bigger. And if you think that's dramatic enough, hold on tight, because minutes later, what came from Buckingham Palace detonated the situation like dynamite thrown under Westminster. A completely off-protocol statement, hastily written, rewritten several times, and released without warning to the Prime Minister's office, something so unprecedented that constitutional law experts called it the most explosive intervention since 1936. And behind that statement lay something even more dangerous, something now leaking through internal channels within the royal family itself. Private messages among senior monarchy members discussing the possibility of direct action should Starmer dare to advance with his plan to dismantle institutions that have sustained the United Kingdom for centuries. From that moment, the country entered a countdown. Journalists scrambled, ministers panicked, and Starmer's closest aides were thrown into absolute chaos. Because everyone understood the same thing. This was no longer a political debate. It was a direct confrontation between the Crown and the government. And everything began to unravel the instant Starmer, overcome by the arrogance he had always tried to hide, declared that the United Kingdom of 2025 cannot be governed by institutions from 1725. The audience applauded as if before a visionary, but those who truly understand the British soul heard something else, a direct, calculated, and hostile attack on tradition, stability, and the monarchy itself. William heard, and so did the country. When Starmer announced he might re-examine the monarchy's constitutional role, it wasn't just recklessness. It was an open challenge, a challenge that made the future king pale, clench his hands so tightly his knuckles turned white, and remain motionless for an interminable 47 seconds, staring at the stage as if witnessing a crime against British history being committed without shame. At that exact moment, something changed. It was no longer about politics. It was about institutional survival. And William's silence spoke louder than 1,000 fiery speeches. When he stood up, without warning, without hesitation, without a word to anyone, the impact was so brutal, it cut through the air of the hall like a blade. 2,000 delegates froze. Starmer faltered. The live broadcast fell silent for a few seconds, as if the very audio system had felt the historical weight of what was happening. Britons watched from home, completely stunned, and soon after, what came from the corridor turned this exit into a definitive act. William turned to his security and said, in a firm, audible voice, recorded by internal cameras, "Make sure every media outlet knows I left on purpose. This was not a break. It was a statement." In a country already saturated by crises, inflation, cuts, and insecurity, this landed like a flash of lightning in the storm. The message was simple and devastating. The future king was declaring that Starmer had gone too far, and from that point, the crisis ceased to be political. It became personal. It became institutional. It became inevitable. What no one expected was that, while Westminster desperately tried to contain the political fire, a second fire, even more devastating, began to spread through the country's streets. Thousands of pensioners, already crushed by Labour's new means-testing rules, started sharing videos, stories, and outbursts that struck directly at the heart of the nation. Real, hard, impossible-to-ignore stories. A 72-year-old former nurse skipping meals to pay bills. A 68-year-old widow living in darkness after 6 in the evening. An 81-year-old ex-miner saying he would never vote Labour again after seeing the Queen's grandson attacked while people can barely choose between medicine and food. These voices began to echo abruptly, intensely, and emotionally. Exactly the kind of silent revolt the government has never known how to handle. Within hours, social media was flooded with videos of citizens saying, clearly and indignantly, that Starmer was more concerned with destroying the monarchy than protecting the people he was meant to serve. The country was dividing rapidly, and with each new account, the monarchy's moral strength grew, while the government's authority crumbled like a house of cards. And then, just as the tension reached its peak, the unthinkable happened. Only 4 hours after William's historic walkout, King Charles himself appeared live in a national broadcast to speak directly to the British people. No official statement, no diplomatic note, just him alone, facing the camera, breaking every modern protocol. The room at Balmoral was silent, almost solemn, as the king spoke words that seemed to span centuries of tradition. The crown exists to serve the British people, to ensure stability, continuity, and unity in times of division. And then came the sentence that made all of Europe hold its breath. My son did not act in defiance of democratic politics, but in defense of the constitutional balance that protects this nation. When that balance is threatened, silence becomes complicity. We will not remain silent. Those words fell upon the government like a meteor. Experts called the address politically nuclear. For millions of Britons, it was confirmation that something extremely serious was happening, and that the monarchy had finally decided to react. But if you think the impact ended there, you are very much mistaken. Inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was described by aides as on the brink of rupture. Internal sources revealed that King Charles had rewritten his address at least 7 times, removing careful diplomatic language and replacing it with direct, almost harsh warnings by the standards of the modern monarchy. Advisors were visibly nervous. Some pleaded, almost begged, for the king not to take sides. But his response, according to a veteran aide, was short, cold, and final. I am not choosing sides. I am choosing Great Britain. And it was at that moment everything changed. Because a monarch may remain neutral in partisan debates, but never when the government is seen as threatening the constitutional stability of the country. Meanwhile, Starmer and his cabinet were in silent panic. Emergency calls were made constantly. Ministers desperately tried to persuade the palace to back down. And most shockingly, a minister confided that if William continued to resist, it could trigger the most serious confrontation between crown and government in decades. In other words, the government was officially afraid. And then came the blow that nobody, absolutely nobody, saw coming. At 3:21 in the afternoon, Kensington Palace broke another centuries-old tradition and released a statement that had not been cleared with Downing Street, completely shattering the protocol governing the relationship between government and heir to the throne. The message was clear, firm, categorical. The Prince of Wales will carry out his schedule as normal, and no political request will interfere with his public duties. The word political there acted like a precision bomb. It was a direct, explicit, frontal attack on government interference. Within minutes, chaos was unleashed. Starmer's staff accused the palace of compromising national security, a justification so absurd it provoked laughter even within the monarchy itself. In response, royal aides fired back, saying the government was hiding something much bigger and using the term security as a mask for an agenda that could no longer be concealed. The world's press camped outside Kensington. Headlines exploded. The United Kingdom, within hours, plunged into its greatest constitutional standoff since the abdication of 1936. And before continuing with this revelation that is sending Westminster into panic, let me ask you one very important thing. If you are a true Briton, a patriot who cannot stand to see Starmer destroying our country's institutions, click subscribe now and leave a like. This helps this video reach even more people who need to know the truth they are trying to hide from. From this point, the confrontation was no longer just a battle of narratives. It became a direct clash between two colossal forces vying to control the immediate future of the United Kingdom. And that's when the final blow began to leak from behind the scenes. A senior aide revealed that Starmer's request to Prince William was not just unusual, it was absolutely unprecedented. For the first time in modern history, a prime minister had asked the heir to the throne to suspend his public duties for months, something that had never, ever been requested of any successor to the crown. When this information came to light, the political class panicked because it made clear that the government was trying to isolate William, silence him, neutralize any possibility of institutional pushback. And if Downing Street tried to hide this request, it was because they knew full well what it represented: direct, aggressive interference, totally outside the law, something that could, and still might, be interpreted as an abuse of power. Suddenly, the question everyone was asking was no longer, what happened? But, what is the government trying to hide? Meanwhile, the standoff escalated so rapidly that by nightfall, the United Kingdom seemed to be living in two different countries. On one side, Downing Street plunged into silence and tension. Aides huddled in closed rooms, desperately trying to contain the political collapse. On the other, the palace, firm, unshaken, exuding a confidence that only those who know the truth behind the scenes could display. And when it became public that the government and the monarchy were no longer speaking directly, the situation reached a critical level. For veteran counselors, this was no longer a crisis. It was an institutional rift, the kind of breach that, if not contained immediately, could redefine how the country is governed. Many feared Starmer had crossed a point of no return, putting at risk not only his leadership but the very stability of the nation. And if there was any doubt about this, it vanished when internal sources revealed that King Charles had been warned. If this dispute continued, the United Kingdom would face the greatest threat to its monarchical structure in nearly a century. And it was just when everything seemed to be heading towards a silent standoff that something even more explosive emerged. Something that turned a serious crisis into a historic one. Sources close to the Prime Minister's cabinet admitted, on condition of anonymity, that Starmer already feared he could not control the monarchy's advance into the public debate. But what truly terrified his closest allies was discovering that members of the royal family, including William's advisors, were gathering documents, accounts, and records to prove that the government had been trying to manipulate, limit, and even intimidate the heir to the throne's public role. This set off a red alert in Westminster. If such documents were released, they could not only politically destroy the Prime Minister, but place him directly under investigation. The whole country began to realize that the confrontation was not just symbolic. It was a battle for survival between two massive institutions, the monarchy, guardian of centuries of tradition, and a government that, according to many, is trying to dismantle everything in the name of an ideological project the public never approved at the ballot box. The tension was so intense that veteran politicians compared the moment to watching a live wire about to touch a pool of petrol. And let me know in the comments, which city or country are you watching this video from? I want to know how far this patriotic community is reaching, because the whole of the United Kingdom needs to wake up to what Starmer is doing. And when this perception spread, the British public exploded in reaction. Headlines dominated the early morning papers, news programs extended live broadcasts, and political commentators described the situation as the moment that will define the decade. Public pressure began to move like a tide, pushing more and more people towards the monarchy's side. On social media, hashtags demanding transparency, ministerial resignations, and clarification of the secret request to William topped the trends. Even within Labour, influential figures expressed discomfort with the direction Starmer had taken. And it was in this chaotic climate, with growing distrust and popular revolt, that a question began to echo across the nation, from the pubs of Manchester to the squares of Edinburgh. If the government tried to silence the future king, then what else are they hiding? It was the perfect question, because it had no easy answer, and the more Westminster tried to dodge it, the stronger it became, fueling a widespread sense that the government was on the brink of a moral and institutional collapse that no one could stop. With pressure mounting and the truth beginning to emerge through the cracks of the crisis, experts were already warning that the situation had crossed the point of no return. In interviews, former Supreme Court members openly said the country was facing one of the greatest constitutional upheavals since the abdication of 1936. Political analysts acknowledged that Starmer had completely lost control of the narrative, and worse, had lost control of his own government. Leaks began to multiply within Labour, showing divided ministers, aides in conflict, and even suspicions that cabinet members were planning to resign if the crisis worsened. And what shocked the public most was the emergence of rumors that Starmer was seeking international support to bolster his position, something many interpreted as pure desperation. Meanwhile, the palace remained secure, silent, almost serene, as if it knew exactly what lay ahead. The monarchy's confidence contrasted with the government's chaos, and this contrast alone began to shape public opinion. For millions, it became clear who was fighting for England and who was fighting only for themselves. And it is in this tense, unpredictable, and historic scenario that the United Kingdom now finds itself. As new revelations approach, one truth becomes ever clearer. The crisis is no longer a confrontation between a prime minister and a prince. It has become a moral judgment on the kind of country Great Britain wants to be. On one side, a government accused of hiding information, pressuring the monarchy, and trying to reshape age-old institutions without the people's consent. On the other, a royal family that has finally decided to raise its voice, challenging a political project that threatens the very structure of the state. And that is why the next hours will be decisive. Documents may be revealed, speeches may be made, and alliances may crumble before our eyes. What is already clear is that Starmer has crossed a line he should never have crossed, and now faces the reaction of a monarchy that does not intend to back down. This is the moment that could redefine the future of the United Kingdom, and we will follow every step. Because the crisis is not over. It is only just beginning.